Okay.
All right.
Hello, everyone. This is the Flower of Babel podcast. I'm Mary Zoso, and I have a super extra special guest here with me. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I am Elodes. You probably know me on Twitter as @ElodesNL, which stands for Netherlands, by the way, because I'm from the Netherlands. No one seems to pick up on that. Um, I tweet about things like gender, sexuality, intimacy, authentic relating, circling, masculinity, men's work as well. Yeah, a bunch of stuff around that. Um, Yeah, that's me. I'm excited to be here, Mary.
I'm so excited to have you. And let's see. So you have some big cool stuff you want to talk to us about. We went to an event and have some things to kind of, I guess, sort of process here with us.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so I'm really excited to hear about it. And you want to tell us?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so this basically came about. I tend to go to a lot of retreats around intimacy and emotional processing, and I've been to like Easter level one, like shamanic work, a bunch of different stuff. And most of the time, I like to write or tweet about my experiences. But in this case, I went to a week-long retreat about a month ago now, and I just noticed that in processing it and journaling about it, there are just so many different f- things that happened during it, and so many different frames that I could layer on top of it, and just a lot that it moved in me, where I felt like I couldn't possibly write about this as like a single piece. Like I like the stuff that I write to have like a single theme or like a topic. And in this case, like I wouldn't do justice to this event because it was so many different things at once. Um, and yeah, so basically, I felt that a conversation would be the best medium for this. So I reached out on Twitter to see if anyone wanted to do a podcast with me. And Mary, you are one of those people. And as it happens, you are the lucky one. So
I'm
yeah,
so I'm so excited. I feel so honored. And also like I really understand like how when something's so intense, like it's hard to write. It's way easier to get it out in just a kind of flow
yeah,
speaking for whatever reason. I have the same experience like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Plus, I think there's also an angle of like, I feel like because so much of this retreat was about the experience of it, and I want to communicate that experience, and I feel like at this point it's just better to do that with my voice, so that you can sort of hear my tone, and viewers can, readers could hear my tone rather than just having to do it through writing. Yeah, which more and more seems like a more limited medium. So I'm yeah, excited to try this format.
Cool.
Yeah. So funny thing, it was a men's retreat to begin with, or it had kind of a peculiar structure where to start with it would be a, let's say, 3.5 days men's retreat held at the same time and in the same space as a 3.5 days women's retreat, where on the fourth day we would so in the first 3.5 days we wouldn't talk to each other, we wouldn't even make eye contact. And then the fourth day, we would meet each other and then continue in a mixed capacity from there on. And I signed up for that kind of as a men's retreat angle because I feel like I've done a lot of work around masculinity and men, and I've written about it a lot. And it felt right to me to do a men's retreat to kind of bond with men in a deeper way than I feel like a lot of masculinity norms allow for usually. Um,
How long
and I,
are
yeah,
sorry, are other men's retreats that you've done, are they much shorter, or how did it seem?
So I've never done a proper men's retreat. This would be my
Mm.
first. Like I've been to like single day men's workshops and events, but yeah, never to like a full on thing. Um, yeah, and I'd been to some workshops by this facilitator at the International Circling Festival, and then I saw that he was holding this kind of retreat, and I was like, that sounds very cool. I want to do it. Feel ready for it. Yeah, but then we showed up, Mary, and already we showed up in the same room together with men and women. And we were already a bit surprised by that. Like we all thought we were going to be separated at the start. And then the facilitator, what you got to understand, Mary, for some people, I got a pretty good discount on this because I'm doing a sabbatical, but some people paid like nearly 2,500 euros for the week-long retreat. So they were hoping to get like a good sort of, gendered space out of it. Figured they knew what they signed up for. But then they arrived, and the facilitator basically just went, "Hey guys, a month ago I did ayahuasca and it changed my life, and I'm gonna throw it around the structure of this whole retreat. It's just gonna be mixed." And all of us were like, "Huh?" Like we paid so much to have like a gendered experience, at least at the start. Like what's happening? Um, but in the end, it turned out really, really well. It turned out fantastically. I think he made the right choice. But it was a bit of a rocky start to the retreat itself.
Cool. So yeah, so do you want to tell us about the structure, or do you want to kind of jump into some specific experiences, or?
Yeah, I can just sort of like a general overview of the retreat itself. I mentioned it was a mixed space, but it is more like meta mix, I would say, in the sense that there are some spaces that were just with men, or for women it would be just with women, and then some spaces that were mixed. And these, like in the beginning, the first 3.5 days, I would say, were still like mostly men's spaces for me as a man, and then it became more and more mixed, kind of as time went on. The general theme of the retreat was kind of a healing in tribe setting, where the idea was that a lot of people walk around with what the facilitator calls group trauma, which is trauma that happened in groups, and which relates to how to groups, which relates to how you feel in groups. And there's plenty of people who are perfectly fine and normal and happy and healthy when it comes to one-on-one contexts. But then when it comes to like a group context, or like how they relate to the world at large, to strangers, to any of these things, they tighten up, they constrict, they feel shame, or inhibitedness, or anxiety, or any of these things. And the facilitator's view on this is that these are things that can only be healed in group settings because they happen in group settings. Hence the retreat. The central modality of it was, there were a lot of different modalities that were used. Some modalities centered on kind of the classical somatic modalities. So these are breath, movement, and sound, really getting the body alive, viewing us as like the kind of the animal bodies that we have, that we are, getting us in touch with those, getting us in touch with movement, with dance, with movement interactions, consent, like all those sorts of classical things. And we also had some sessions that were purely focused on, as I mentioned, the men's work and the women's work. But the general modality, whenever we did mixed work, it tended to be something that he calls circle work. And this is different from circling. It's a quite different modality. Basically, what it is you are with the group, whether that's men or mixed, or women, of course. And it's essentially about trying to attune as a group into what is alive in the group right now. What do we as a group need? And sometimes that means, right, that can mean we need like a minute to hold hands, take some breaths together, land together, to kind of settle our nervous systems from whatever had happened before. Maybe a busy break, maybe an intense exercise. But more often the space was open, and the group felt open to receive whatever was going on within people within the group. So often there would be some person or multiple people who were feeling very strongly about something in their system, like something was really alive for them. And then they could name that to the group. And then if it felt alive for the group, the group would listen to this person and would feel into like, okay, is this person really alive with whatever is inside of them right now? And if the group felt that like, oh yeah, this is like a resonant thing, like we can see that this is alive for them, we hearing this, like we empathize with it, we feel that it is going on for them, and then it starts feeling alive for the group, and then the group might get this openness to receive more of this. And then if that's the case, and oftentimes this would be the case, then the person would be invited to go on to the mat in the middle of the group, and basically to act out or move out or express out or work out whatever it is that they felt in whatever modality either felt good for them or was advised by the facilitator or was advised by the group. Like we would also fit into this, like what is it that this person needs? And then see, can we as a group give this to them? And are there people in this group who feel alive with whatever is going on in this person, who feel that in their system as well, who resonate with it, and who want to come into the mat with them to help work this out for them in some capacity.
Wow, this is amazing, an amazing idea to me. Like because I definitely feel like when you said like, group trauma, I'm like, oh, that resonates. Like I have tons of like intense anxiety with groups and stuff like that. And to call together so many people who also have that anxiety and to try to create a positive experience, like sounds really incredible to me.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's a really powerful modality. Really powerful intention for the space as a whole. Um, I want to correct you a little bit. It wasn't necessarily that there would always be positive experiences, although in practice it often was. It was also about the authenticity of the group and how they felt about you as, people. Because there's a lot of things alive in the group once you get a bunch of strangers together, right? Like a lot of interpersonal judgments and things start happening. And it's also the question of this space, and also for the facilitator, how do you guide the group through all of these judgments and tensions to create that kind of openness where people can actually heal in.
Okay. So like I guess I'm thinking positive in the sense of like it's sort of dealt with in a productive way, as opposed to like getting derailed into like some kind of mob mentality bullying
Yeah,
type of thing.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's amazing.
yeah, yeah. Um, I can start talking about some of the more introductory spaces that we had,
Yeah.
if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, let's see. So I mentioned that in the beginning we mostly went into our separate gendered spaces. Yeah, so throughout, by the way, I have no clue what happened in the women's spaces. That is for, the women to know and experience and talk about if they wish. Yeah, apologies to any women who are listening to this. But I can tell you about the men's spaces. So in the beginning, um, to kind of create that sense of like brotherhood with the men, like we paired up with another man in the space. For context, these are men of all ages and mostly white, but also, a few men of color, and really of all ages. Like we had people from approximately my age, like 27, to 6-year-olds. We also had someone who was, I believe, 76 years old. So a lot of variety in there, which is really great. Like there's a theme in general that people tend to mostly interact with people of their own age, and especially when it comes to like really relational things, like you have your parents that you relate to. But apart from that, like you'll never see an older person get very angry or anything, or be able to play that role for like a space holder for like a younger person. So yeah, it was a nice feature of this space, very all ages. We started paired up, and we just went on a walk through a nearby forest, and we tried to first get into the attunement with this person. Like we would take turns kind of tracking how is this other person relating to the forest? How are they exploring the forest? How are they being in this nature space? There'll be no interaction, just trying to feel into how is this other person feeling in this space. And afterwards we get it back inside, and with the same person, under guidance of some pretty intense music, we basically did a thing where we held our arms out in front of us with our palms facing us and our fingers nearly touching. So it's sort of like a pose that we have to hold. And then we had to hold this for quite a long time. It felt like maybe like 15 minutes or so, maybe 20. And afterwards we switched to holding our hands above us, with our arms above us, which is an even more difficult pose. And the intention here was basically to do this with another person, with another brother, and to hold that eye contact with them. And after some time, like after a few minutes, if it starts hurting fairly badly, like it's a lot of effort to keep this up for a long period of time. Yeah, which but it's sort of like a commitment exercise. Like you've essentially shown to the other brother, like, hey, I am here. Like at the start of this retreat, like I commit to basically sacrifice my own comforts to bear pain for you as a brother. And I see that you are committing in the same way to me. And I will not flinch away from this pain. I will keep this eye contact. I will not try to distract myself from it. I will be here with it, and I will be here with your pain. And together we are here holding that space for us and committing to each other in that way. So yeah, that was quite a nice way to kind of open it up, and immediately grant like a sense of like, yeah, we're here for real. Like we're not just here to fuck around. You know, we're here because we want to show up for something and want to show up for each other as men. Really with that sort of like strong, stable, supportive male energy, right? Yeah, which so that was kind of how we were introduced to each other.
Cool. I'm curious, and you may not know the answer to this at all, but I don't know if these kinds of activities are things that you have encountered in other places, if there's like a social convention behind them, if there's like research behind them, if people are just kind of intuitively making up these activities, and how do you feel like they hit people in the same way pretty consistently, or do they seem to hit different people differently? I'm really curious about that, if you know.
Yeah, good question. I think on the whole, there are many modalities in this retreat that I've also seen in other retreats. And in this case, the lead facilitator has 20 years of experience. So, you know, he's tried a lot of stuff, and presumably kept what worked well. I wouldn't necessarily say that these things hit people the same way. I think that something like the exercise that I mentioned just now, yeah, it has a pretty clear intention and a pretty clear outcome in that term. But then that's mostly kind of to create a sense of solidarity. And the circle work that I mentioned earlier, there it's very varied. Like it's always about what's alive in a group right now. And in that sense, it's completely unpredictable. Like it's never the same thing. Even within this week, each session was completely unique, which is part of why I would find it so difficult to write a piece comprising all of them. Because they all had their own themes and they all had their own different things that were alive for people. And even if we're talking about the same session, it just impacts people in very diverse ways. So Yeah, because it is like, I feel like the more structured you make these sessions, the more consistent of an outcome you get, aside from people for whom the structure does not work, and then you just get an outcome of did not work, which is, not super conducive to whatever you'd like to create in this space. Versus these kind of sessions that are really about what is alive in people. Well, in that sense, like, if you feel a lack of aliveness, then that's alive for you, and you can share that into the space, and you can work with that, and that tends to create a lot more openness in people. But then also more varied results. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Being able to kind of step out and like be authentic about your lack of connection in order to create the connection.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. I mentioned the men's exercise, the first one, which is kind of like this bonding, commitment-driven space. The next men's space that we held was also kind of like a nice introductory space, because it was basically a structure of, look, we're all here as strangers. We don't know each other yet, but we sure do have a lot of judgments about each other already. Like we've had like some meals with each other. We've talked to each other a little bit, and just in general, when you meet people, there's already a lot of judgment that you have about them. This was actually not clear to me as a person like 5 or 6 years ago, but it really is now. Like, you meet people and you immediately have the sense like who they are, not necessarily who they are, but at least who you think they are. And that sort of thing really tends to inhibit connection, and it inhibits connection interpersonally, but it also inhibits connection within the group as a whole. So long as these judgments are playing, like you might say, okay, I'm happy to talk to this half of the group, but this other half of the group, which isn't great if you want to create and foster a space that is about healing and tribe. Like, you want the kind of shared unity, you want to create a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood. So what we did here was basically we all got a chance to name a judgment that we had about a person in the space. And this could be anything. Some people said things like, oh, I judge you as a person who thinks he's better than everyone. Or I judge you as a person who thinks, or who would have sex with my wife behind my back. Or I judge you as a kind of man who doesn't know how to behave, who doesn't know how to be socially appropriate. All of these kinds of judgments. Judge you as a kind of man who remains distant from people. Whatever you felt about a person, anything was welcome here. But
were they mostly like kind of negative judgments, or were some of them like, you seem like someone I'd like to hang out with, kind of thing?
No, definitely like negative stuff. Yeah. But after we said these judgments, then we had to own them ourselves. Like, oh, I judge you as the kind of man who thinks he's better than everyone else. Just like me. I also at times feel that I'm better than everyone else, Or, yeah, I also, well, I don't want to say that I would have sex with someone's wife, but, there's these sorts of parts in all of us, like shadow parts, that it's easy to judge in others and try to ignore in ourselves. So in this case, it was kind of like, you're not just sort of putting the other person down to like, oh, I judge you as this kind of bad man. You're also admitting yourself, like, and I am also imperfect. I'm also sometimes bad. I have bad parts of myself. And that kind of brings you both to the same level, where before and you were strangers who didn't really want to know each other. Now you're like, oh, we both have this like shadow part. What are we going to do with this? And then the invitation was for each such pair of men to take this tension onto the mat and basically physicalize it. And specifically in the form that we would have to slap each other on the ass while trying to protect our own ass.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great mix of like both fighting energy but also playful and also a little bit silly, to get rid of like these sort of negative, heavy energy a little bit, or like kind of to transform that heavy energy of the judgment into something playful and silly. Where after you've tried to hit someone on the ass, and they try to do that with you, like you can't do that with a person and still kind of remain mad at them or still remain tense towards them. It creates some sort of like, oh, we can still like play together. Kind of like this sense of, okay, we've got that much, right? Which is great, and not to get too gendered about this, but I do think there's some sort of stereotypical thing where like talking is a conflict resolution that fits women, and nowadays it's often put on top of, laid on to men's ways of interaction, that we're expected
Yeah,
to solve conflicts in the same way.
I was gonna
Um,
ask about that actually, because
yeah.
I've obviously seen like kind of intimacy building exercises in groups that
Hmm.
that, that felt very women centered, like talk about your feelings, open up, and like
Yeah.
the men that I saw just seemed very uncomfortable, and like it just did not resonate with them, and also like they felt sort of like there was something wrong with them because it wasn't resonating with them. And I was going to ask, like, in these things, like how the activities are different for just men and how that works. So that's
Yeah.
really awesome to hear.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I imagine that they didn't just do talking in the women's spaces. I imagine they also
Sure.
physicalized it there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've seen similar things, and I feel like there's some sense of like talking can help men show up as in the parts of themselves that are weak, let's say. But if you want to also have them show up in a strong way, then you're really gonna make it physical, I think. I feel fairly strongly about this.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes complete sense.
yeah, and not just I don't mean merely in the sense of fighting, even though that definitely helps. I also well, as it happens, the next men's space that we did was physical in a different way, which was that we kind of tried to get our into our fire energy, right? Like this sort of activatedness, like this strength, this like roaring, this really like coming from like the gut or like the pelvis, rather than trying to keep it in your head, like the talking ways, the throats or whatever. Like you really try to get it from the depths of your body. Um, and this was really, really great. Like we all kind of all showed up, not together, individually. We all got onto the mat one by one to kind of show our fire to the other men, in whatever way felt right for us. And for some people, that wasn't roaring. For some people, it was maybe more like a stillness or like a dance movement or whatever it was, or like a hissing, or like sometimes you felt like a charge towards this one particular guy who you really needed to get like mad at in some way, and you can invite them onto the mat and just stand before them and kind of close that distance between you and the other man, while keeping that intense eye contact, while keeping that sense of like broad chest, shoulders out. Hey, like what's up, you my dude? Like in a sense of just having this sense of like but more like a sense of I could show up in that way, and you can see this, and I'm showing to you that I am capable of that, like that sort of energy.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, it was really great. Mm,
Yeah, I feel like you could not do something like that in a mixed group and have
mm.
it and have the energy work well in the group, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, never say never, but I do think there's some sort of like, um, yeah, I figure at that point, like an intimidation aspect would start playing a role, or also on the men's side, there would be something of like, oh, I shouldn't intimidate or scare a woman, or oh, women
Definitely.
are like this is sort of felt sense of women being fragile or like smaller, right? Like where you wouldn't want to seem either to them or to the public as the kind of guy who could like,
Right.
like crunch a woman. Like you don't want to
Yeah.
seem that way. So there's definitely ways of doing this. I have been in a masculinity space where there were also women, and this worked quite well. But it's something where you really have to get there. Yeah.
And so as this was going on, I know you've got experience, and probably some of the other men there had experience with men's groups maybe. But I guess I guess most of the men that I know, I feel like, do not have any kind of experience with that and would have a really difficult time adjusting. And I'm wondering if there were men there who were struggling with that, to kind of, because like intimacy between men where I come from just does not happen, like at all. So I'm wondering if that was something that some people had to hurdle they had to get over, or
That's a really good question. I think it happened at different paces for different people. Like for me, it definitely took me like 2 days before I'd kind of landed in the group and had this openness in me. For some people, it took 6 days out of 7, and for others, they were right, they were right into it right away. I hmm. I mean, it sounds intense in this way, but if I'm talking about the fire exercise, we're already on the 3rd day, right? So like we build it up, and what I leave unmentioned is the somatic work that we did in between, as like the sort of the glue exercises in between, so to speak, to really get you into your body and to kind of unlock that more direct realness. Like most people have sort of a filter between themselves and reality, which is often like social, is often verbal. Like if you're talking, it's like all these layers of socialization are on top of like the verbal space, I feel. Whereas like if you try to get people to move within their bodies and to move with their breath and their sound of their voice, often I think people are surprised by how quickly they can get into that space of realness and of meeting each other, not as like social people, but also as just like, I don't want to say necessarily animal, but more in a sense of like just sort of like as bodies, right, with nervous systems. And that's sort of, once you get that sort of connection going, then you can really get into this sort of like realness, authenticity work, intimacy work. Yeah.
Cool. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
It's a well-placed question, because the next thing that we did with the men was, in fact, an intimacy space of physical intimacy, where we'd kind of shown up in commitment, we'd shown up in judgment and honesty, and shown up in fire. But now, which are all kind of like like good to get men also kind of feeling like men, kind of get them to feel masculine, which is also you want that to happen. But then once men are in this space, I mean, for a lot of men, masculinity is maybe sort of vulnerable, but it is less vulnerable than men to men intimacy, like than inter-male love. And because a lot of men, haven't received this as adults or even as teens, right? Or so often even from their fathers. So it's an entirely new thing for them. And there's like all these layers of homophobia. Well, I'm sure everyone who's hearing this can imagine that male intimacy isn't a commonplace thing. So in this case, for this exercise, we really try to just kind of sink into it in a slow but quite deep way. And the form that this took was belly to belly work, which is a specific modality where you lie on a mattress opposite each other and you basically connect your bellies together. And this is kind of like a nervous system connecting exercise where you try to breathe with each other and you feel the other person's breath and you have that sort of like full body closeness, right? It's not necessarily a hug, it's not really a cuddle, it's really about that sort of nervous system connection, just in a very close, intimate way. Yeah, and just feeding this other man as the animal body that they are, and meeting them in that way, and feeling them in that way, in a really direct way.
And you said this was on which day? On the third or fourth day, or?
So I think this was on the evening of the second day. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'd had like 1.5 full days.
Mhm. Wow.
Mm.
That to me, like, I'm from Indiana. Guys don't do that stuff.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine a single guy that I grew up around being willing to participate in that. Like, they'd be like, nope, I'm out. Did you have any? Were there guys that were like, no, I'm not doing this one?
There was so for the most part, people were pretty willing. Definitely because we'd been warmed up, and also certainly because there is like a selection effect of the kinds of men who would go to these spaces, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, you definitely wouldn't have been able to ask this of the man on day one, for sure.
Mhm.
You definitely
Yeah.
needed some work in between.
Yeah.
There was one man who was gay, and he felt perfectly comfortable connecting with men in this intimate way, in a non-sexual way, but he felt that he wanted to share this beforehand because
Mm.
because otherwise it would feel like maybe some men would mind afterwards or would have wanted to know. So just for the clarity, he did that. Another man who incidentally was the one that I paired up with, he was very much in his own process and felt quite distant from the group. So we didn't start with the belly to belly. We actually laid opposite each other on quite a distance and kind of let that be there. And I myself also felt sort of disconnected, and I also wasn't super up for it. So it felt really serendipitous that we had paired up together because we both wanted to start at some distance, and then we kind of slowly got together more and more. But even after maybe 20 minutes, we were still at a distance, still separated. And at this point, this was the first exercise that really moved me in kind of a deep way, which was that it wasn't just a connection with this other man. It was also a connection with man as a group. Like, it was a transpersonal exercise. We were invited to view this man as like he could be. He's now a stranger, but he could have been like a brother. He could be our son. He could be our father. And this kind of moved me a lot, especially the viewing him as my father, where um, my father was a really great, or is still, still alive. We still have a great bond. He's a great man. Like, I really respect him, and I enjoy being around him. And I feel like there's just some sense of like, and I think this is kind of like a masculine or intermale love in general that I missed, that I've also missed from, like men who were like above me in the sort of like in the societal hierarchy, or however you want to call it. Just some sense of like actual desire to connect on that nervous system level and on that sort of vulnerable, fragile, sensitive, attuned level, of meeting each other, of like with a sort of honesty and a spaciousness that like anything can arise in this. Just like a very deep acceptance, versus the more like tough love, let's say, approach that a lot of men take, if not explicitly, then implicitly. And yeah, it had like a depth in this exercise where I really felt very moved, like, oh, I wish I'd gotten this in my life. This love from a man that we can be, I don't want to say weak, but just like we can completely let this pretense of strength go and just lie here together and connect with each other in this way, where there's no need at all to perform or seem strong or seem masculine or need that from the other person. Yeah, that moved me quite deeply, and to be seen in, being moved in that, and I teared up about this. I was sobbing, lying on the mat there. We hadn't even connected yet, and already I was like, oh, I'm really into it. And being seen that I was also found beautiful in this realness, in that part of me. It was, yeah, just incredibly meaningful.
That's wow. That's so profound. And I love how you explain kind of the psychological and emotional sort of process that you went through, sort of like going from this kind of sense of discomfort with it to sort of settling into I don't know if comfort is the right word, but like a sense of like you're in it and you're kind of vibing with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and like this deep acceptance of like, and also like with this particular pairing, like most other men, they were doing belly to belly, no problem, and presumably enjoying this. I don't know, I was in my own space with this guy. But for us, it was also like a sort of mutual acceptance of like, oh, we're both in this whole process where we don't feel good connecting yet, and that's completely accepted too. Like rather than some sense of like, oh, you're not man enough for this or what, or oh, you're not ready enough to meet each other. No, there's just a sense of fully letting each other be, and that was honestly more moving than any kind of mere physical contact could have been.
Yeah, I love that gentleness too. I do feel like men get a lot of like, yeah, what, just do it, be a man and do it. And I feel like this gentleness is so important in so many situations. And there's kind of a gentleness which I feel like is maybe more from a female perspective that that works well with women, but what happened here sounds like something that would be really effective at giving men the kind of, I don't know, masculine gentleness that they need
Mm,
sometimes. Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, like less sort of, yeah, that's a good distinction. I would say something like less like actively loving or reassuring or comforting, and more something like totally letting be, like an acceptance. Yeah, something like that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah, and as you say, like this gentleness and slowness was a really wonderful thing. Like I was given all the space and time that I needed by this guy, where I really, more than I've ever felt, I felt like I was just allowed to like really take all of that time and space to stop through whatever it was that was going on inside of me. And I felt no sense of being rushed in this at all, which,
mhm.
yeah, just a really great spaciousness that this man gave me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
very
really
grateful for that.
mhm.
Yeah. And this is only the second day, go figure. Um, mm, oh, let's see. There's a lot of different spaces that happened that I could talk about. Um, uh, I I sent you the list of the spaces. Is there
Mhm.
anyone that you feel drawn to hearing about right now?
Let me take a look. I've got it right here. Hmm. Um, I guess I'm wondering, things that jump out at me or that I'm curious about are slowness space
Mm.
and men-devouring space. Those are the first ones that jump out at me.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, let me. Um, yeah, let's do the men's devouring space. There was also another space, which was the impromptu devotional space. I think those two kind of go well together. These two spaces both arose from the circle work, and they both arose because there was something alive in women that they wanted to move onto the mat. So they don't relate to me necessarily, but they were still powerful to see. The impromptu devotional space, I'll start with that one, which was basically a woman about 40 years old. She had been a virgin up until a year ago, and she, at the age of 8, as a kind of standard thing apparently that happened in her culture, um, 3 of her aunts basically held her down and performed some kind of female genital mutilation on her. And she'd borne that trauma ever since, that trauma in her body, around her sex, around sex in general, around pleasure, like a deep shamefulness around it, a deep constrictedness around it, a deep lack of ability to trust pleasure, to trust that in her body. And with this also a deep distrust towards women and a deep sense of feeling betrayed by women, because women were the people who did this to her. Even though she was also a woman, there was a little sense of like, don't you see what you're doing? Like, you're doing this to one of your own. But they did it. So this was really a life for her quite early in the week. And yeah, obviously it resonated with the whole group. So she was invited onto the mat, and basically the desire that she had was to reclaim her own pleasure, to let it into her body, and to reclaim that she gets to have that she gets to experience pleasure, that she gets to enjoy it, that it is granted to her, that it is wanted for her, um, as well as a sense of getting her yoni, um, which was so dishonored by these women. There was something like a wound there that still needed to be made right, that hadn't been made right in all these 3 decades. And she felt a desire to surrender, to let go of this having to control her own body, of having to stay in this state of constrictedness around this state of anxiety around pleasure. She wanted to just surrender to feeling good, surrender to what was going on, to feel like she could let herself be in the hands of others and not have it be dangerous, to not feel that fear that was inflicted onto her at such a young age. So she went into the mat with all of these desires. And what organically happened within the group was that first 3 women came onto the mat for her to kind of represent her 3 aunts, so to speak. And they held basically an honoring ritual, a devotional ritual to her body, her pleasure, and to her yoni in specific. This wasn't necessarily a sexual space, like she kept her clothes on, and it wasn't necessarily an erotic space. It was really more like a devotional space. I have this piece that I wrote on my Substack, which you've read and instead also proofread, of course. It's called Memories of Devotion, and there I talk a little bit about the space that resembled this one, but it was more explicit, and it went further. In this case, it was just mostly these 3 women who, with a lot of soft touch and a lot of energetic, like bowing down, speaking softly to not just to this woman, but also to her body and to her yoni, to really try to honor and give back this yeah, honoring that she had deserved all along, to kind of restore this dignity that was inherent to her body, to her sex, and to her sense of pleasure. Um, and after some time, this ritual came to completeness, and then the woman invited whichever man felt called in the space to come to her and touch her for her pleasure, so that she could surrender to it. And something like 11 men came towards her and gave her this sense of loving touch. And this was also beautiful to see, all of these men really treating her like a queen, like so deserving of pleasure, of enjoyment. And she, in turn, it was really beautiful to see that she could surrender to it, that she felt safe enough and honored enough in her body to just let this pleasure course through her, move through her, to move her body with hers, with that feeling, and to really enjoy it, and like to let it come out in her breath, her movement, her sound, like louder and louder, screaming like yes, yes, and
Wow.
feel like, oh fuck yeah, like this pleasure that you felt, which is
That's beautiful.
beautiful. Like
Yeah.
you really, yeah, saw this woman like go from like a closeness and a sense of like woundedness to having that be healed, and then being able to kind of fully physically, with her full presence, reclaim that fuck yeah that she felt in her body. Um, yeah, which is amazing. Really, it's just so wonderful to see anyone, really feel that pleasure so fully and own it and have no shame about it anymore. Just like, oh fuck yeah, this person is feeling so great, and we love that for them.
Oh, that's so awesome. It's got me a little bit teary.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was amazing and quite transformative for her as well. Yeah. Whew. Um, let me take a sip of water.
um, would now be a good time for a break?
Um,
Or do you want to go?
I can do the men-devouring space, and I think then
Okay.
we could do a break.
Yep. Cool.
Yep, cool. Um, so the men-devouring space was, in this case, it was not necessarily something that was alive for the woman. It was her birthday, so she was invited onto the mat anyway, and then asked like, "What is alive for you?" And in that capacity, she answered, which was, um, well, as the title says, she wanted to devour men. Um, as a kind of sexual, energetic experience. Um, she wanted to just explore that part of her sexuality, where um, she just gets to pursue her own pleasure and view men as objects for this, like as sexual objects, and to really just go with what she wants and have this sort of like feast of men in that space. So she selected, I think, 7 men, 6 or 7, to come into the space with her and basically to stay upright on their knees, eyes closed, hands behind their back, um, fully in the sort of like serving modality for her, so that she could do with them whatever she wanted. And um, this, I think, one of the first things that she did was to literally, she went around and smelled each of these men's crotches. I mean, they had clothes on, right? So, but it was still a sort of like animalistic sense of like,
Yeah.
who are you? Who are you? What kind of man are you? What I want of you. To kind of vibe into that. And then afterwards, she touched the men, uh, groped their bodies, and in one case of one man, like made out of him, spit in his mouth, even like this sort of thing. um, but before long, she found that she had sort of gotten her fill of this, and that what she now wanted was kind of to be devoured, so to speak, and also to have this surrendering happen to be able to undergo this. Um, and this took place sort of similarly to how it took place in the last section that I mentioned, where just these men came to her and touched her. And beforehand, there was a little talk of like, okay, how will we do boundaries? And she basically said like, I'll signal them live. Like if you touch something that I don't want, I'll tell you. And
That's great.
yeah, which is great. Yeah, that she felt like comfortable in this to signal this. And here's some interesting things happened, which is one thing that happened, for instance, was that the men took off first her shirt and then, also massage her breasts. And at some point they also took off her bra. And so she was there topless. And they continued touching her there and as well as across her entire body. And what happened at this point, as later this was verbalized by another woman in the space who was witnessing this, who felt a great halt, a great no, like a scream, when this woman's bra was taken off. And what had happened indeed in that space was that this woman had the woman who was in this space, I mean now, she had a brief moment of like, oh, this happened. Is that still okay? And then she checked in and it was still okay. But there was definitely a moment of uncertainty there. And this woman in the audience had really caught onto that and really felt that very strongly in herself.
Oh,
And
wow.
so for her, it was like a meaningful experience to see that this woman was able to kind of smoothly go through this process for herself to check her own consent in that moment and to recognize that it was still okay. And then at some point, one of the men, as part of like the general touching of this woman's body, also touched her genital. And there, the woman screamed like, "Not my fucking pussy!" and I mean, this wasn't as sudden as it sounded. She was loud in general with her pleasure, like with the enjoyment. So this sort of was only a little louder than that energy. So the man withdrew his touch from that area and just went on with touching the other parts of the body. And this was okay, right? Like the woman had set a boundary and she was fine. Still, she was still enjoying the other rest of the touch. And for this man, it was really, he told us later, it was really impactful because he had been in a relationship for a long time with a woman who had been the victim of sexual abuse and that really still lived in her body. And what this meant for him was that there was always a sense of, is it okay to touch you here? Is it okay to touch you here? Like if I get to touch you here, do I get to touch you there? If I can touch your pussy, can I touch your breasts? Like, and this constant sense of, am I still safe? Is this still okay? Right, that comes from like feeling not sure about whether the woman is capable of recognizing her own status and voicing it as well. So for him, right, like it's like if really, and I mean, I personally resonated with that as well. And I'm a lot better with this now, but definitely when I started being sexual in my life, there was a huge sense of like, man, like I've seen or like been privy to women's trauma in this sense, and I didn't really know what was safe to do. Yeah, which so the impact that this had on him, to see this woman really, proudly, loudly say like, "Not my fucking pussy," but then still be completely okay for the rest of it. This was like gave him a lot of sense of like the safety of like, oh, I get to just touch her and she will tell me, and that works really, really well.
Yeah.
Um,
I get the
yeah,
impression that's kind of a rare experience for a lot of men to know that the boundaries will be clear and that they will be clarified to you before you've gone too far. So I think, a lot of times, maybe because of indirect communication or because of trauma or whatever, sometimes women are not clear until it's gone way past okay. Like they don't say it in the moment, like stop now and everything's okay. So
for
it
sure.
can be really confusing for men, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean for women too, right? Like that
Yeah.
it is that I know that a lot of women kind of feel that it might be rude or they don't know how to frame it or phrase it in a way that doesn't land as rude, like um yeah. So it was nice to be able to kind of see a woman kind of phrase it also in this kind of the strongest possible terms, right?
Right.
But still have it be clearly okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to see that empowerment in this woman, like, oh, she gets to devour men first and to really
Mhm.
get to pursue that, and then she
Yeah.
gets to be loud in her own pleasure, and then
Yeah.
she gets to be loud in her own boundaries. Like this was like a really like it had like a wildness to it as a vibe, like a really like a wild woman kind of experience that is beautiful to see, like uncontrollable, like powerful, really alive. um the kind of experience that really makes you want to move your own body, like just has this sort of like juiciness or like yumminess to it that was cool for men to see, because we don't often get to see women who are powerful in their sexuality
Right.
in this way, who are there, who are like, I am fucking sexual, I will do this, I will
Yeah.
devour you, like that's not something that we often are privy to.
Yeah.
um Even though it's great, like it's really sexy, and it's not like the only modality that I find sexy in women, but it is for sure a really hot way for a woman to show up, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about like the experience of being in the audience and like kind of how the energy was in the just the
mm,
people watching and how the scene sort of affected them and you specifically.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, people enjoyed it for the most part. For sure, it had a lot of yumminess. It was a lot of like it felt wild, alive, a little risky, a little dangerous. It had that sort of sense of like that everyone was kind of on the edge of their seat, I think, or at least I know I was. Plus, it's this unusual thing where, like, normally the sort of sexual energy, like in kind of cultural depictions of sexuality, we're used to it from a man to woman angle. Um, yeah, it's just very rare to see it in a woman. So for a lot of people, it was like a really exciting thing to see, I think, especially because she really brought that excited energy. Um, But and for a lot of women as well, like it was inspiring to see like a lot of women voice that they were like, oh, like I've never seen that this is possible for a woman to do. I've never seen what it would look like in practice. Um, and um, I can't tell what it is necessarily or exactly that would stop women in this, but I do think it was really meaningful for a lot of women to see this acted out as an example of what it could look like to really own and pursue your own sexuality. Um, yeah, so for a lot of people, it was great. Um, there was a very moving part at the end of it, which was that he had picked 7 men, but only 6 of them kind of moved into the center of the mat. One of them stayed on the outside. And I think this man and this woman had some kind of prior relationship with each other. I don't know what the nature of it was, but they knew each other. And this man had stayed outside for the entire duration of this session, witnessing, remaining on the mat, remaining present, but not joining in. And at the end of the session, after she had been touched by these 6 men in such a sensual and sexual manner, basically what this woman felt was what came up for her was a kind of sense of like, this has been fun, this has been exciting, but my heart has been with you, with this one man, with being outside of it. And what she really wanted was the touch from him, from just this one person, this one connection. And that this part of her heart had not been satiated by either devouring men or by surrendering to the touch of these strangers. It wanted that connectedness, that the realness, that whatever love that this man had for her, it wanted that, and whatever love she had for him. Like again, I don't know their relationship, but it was something there for sure. And So it was beautiful to kind of see her both have her fun, like really enjoy her cake, and to kind of feel into, oh, but the thing that I really value is this connection with this man specifically. And it was beautiful, yeah, to see that land in him as well, because he had felt that it wasn't right for him to join in on this, and that still he had been present as far as she was concerned. He had been present throughout the entire thing in her heart. Yeah, felt just very resonant that for him it had felt right to stay out, and that for her that she realized that she needed him most of all, not because he stayed out, but because of whatever that was there between them.
So
Yeah.
he was able to respond to when she said that, or is this all from her perspective, or did he also
Oh
get?
yeah, no, he felt it literally landed with him when she said that, and he really, yeah, felt the beauty of that, and they connected also on the mat at that point in a really beautiful and intimate way. I don't mean necessarily sexual, just a really tight embrace, but it felt very deep. Like you could see that connection and love that they shared. And you could also see that it was more meaningful than the connection that had happened between her and these random men, either from her or towards her.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So it was a wild space, very multifaceted.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. I am about due for a break. Yep.
Okay. Cool. So